And to the Fox News voter fraud unit now. 4 Arkansas Democrats pled guilty to voter fraud-related charges this week. One, a state representative expected to resign. Prosecutors say absentee ballots were faked and voters bribed with money and booze. And another absentee ballot case has landed a sheriff in jail. We reported on Lincoln County, West Virginia Sheriff Jerry Bowman. Well, he's been sentenced to 1 year and 1 day in a voter fraud scheme. Mr. Bowman admitted falsifying absentee ballots and even voting some himself. The former county clerk there also got 1.5 years behind bars after prosecutors accused the pair of trying to steal the election in West Virginia. Meanwhile, voter ID is on trial across the country. In Texas, the state's attorney general says he's going to go to the U.S. Supreme Court to appeal the federal ruling that blocked the voter ID law there. South Carolina's law is on trial, and this coming Thursday, the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court will hear an appeal of a judge's ruling that supported that state's law. Will voter ID survive or go down in flames? Well, joining us again is the Deputy Secretary of State of Pennsylvania, Mr. Shannon Royer, who's in Philadelphia, where that court hearing will be held. Mr. Royer, good to see you. What do you think will happen in court on Thursday?
Well, I'm very optimistic that the voter ID law in Pennsylvania will be upheld. The Commonwealth Court decision, the lower court's decision on this was crystal clear that it is constitutional, that it is non-discriminatory, that it does not affect disproportionately any voter or any group of voters. And in fact, Judge Simpson in this case cited the U.S. Supreme Court decision from Indiana back in 2008 that found voter ID to be constitutional and quite frankly, a common sense way in which to verify a voter's identity when voting. So because this was such a well-written and well-reasoned decision, and in fact partially based on a U.S. Supreme Court decision, again, I'm optimistic that our voter ID law will be upheld.
And there have been different results in other states. In Texas, for example, that 3-judge panel said that it puts strict, unforgiving burdens on the poor. I mean, even President Obama, during his DNC speech, he criticized voter ID. He criticized, quote, those who are making it harder for you to vote. So you know the arguments that it leads to voter suppression, that it's aimed at the minorities and the elderly and this sort of thing. How did your state try to deal with that? And what's your response?
Well, it's really comparing apples to oranges. The Texas law, for example, it's been reported that you need to spend a minimum of $22 to get the documentation you need for a free voter ID card eventually after you get your documentation. It also mentioned that you have to travel between 200 and 250 miles to get to a place where you can get a photo ID for voting purposes, and that their photo ID entities that issue IDs aren't open on weekends. None of that is the case in Pennsylvania. We have a system in place now with this law that all the documentation you can get for a photo ID for voting purposes is in fact free. We have 71 Department of Transportation centers around the state, 5 of them right here in Philadelphia, where people can get photo IDs for voting purposes, and our facilities are open on the weekend. So not all voter ID laws are written the same. They're not all equal, I guess, in that regard. But Pennsylvania's, again, is modeled after Indiana's law, which was upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court.
Well, but the ACLU, though, still is going to court against you on Thursday. I mean, and Viviette Applewhite, that God bless her, the wonderful woman, 93 years old, who's the chief plaintiff. Well, she turns out she gets her ID. We've talked about this before. Why would they still be going to court if people are getting their IDs in Pennsylvania?
Well, it's remarkable because even Judge Simpson in the Commonwealth Court decision in his 70-page opinion said that no voter will be disenfranchised by this law, that in fact all of the plaintiffs in this case are able to get photo ID for voting purposes. It is a mystery to me why people continue to oppose common sense laws like this. Many states have voter ID laws in place where you show photo identification in order to vote. Judge after judge and court case after court case have said that it is a tool that states can use to verify people's identity when they vote, that it is in fact constitutional. Georgia has been doing, their voter ID law has been in place since 2006 when it was signed into law. It has been functioning very well there, including in Atlanta, which has a very high minority population, much like Philadelphia in our state. So it's working around the country. These laws have been popular according to polling opinion, but nonetheless people continue to oppose it. But again, I think we're going to be successful on Thursday in our court case.
All right. We know it's very controversial, a lot of opposition, and we'll be there covering it on Thursday and see what happens. Mr. Royer, Shannon Royer, who's the Deputy Secretary of State for Pennsylvania, joining us in Philadelphia. Thanks so much again.
Thank you.
And, of course, if you suspect voter fraud where you live, there it is, voter fraud. There it is, voter fraud. At foxnews.com is our address.